Hello, I'm Tim Loughton MP, the MP for East Worthing and Shoreham, and today I'm standing up for Brexit. Now, I've spent the weekend trying to read this monster 585-page document. This is not the deal that we're going to be doing with the EU. This is just the terms on which we will be negotiating a deal, and there's still a lot of work to be done and a lot of detail to be decided upon. Now, back in 2016, I campaigned for Brexit, and I did so with a slightly heavy heart, having consulted a lot on whether we could get a better deal for the UK within the EU, and whether the EU was prepared to reform itself, because I just don't think the EU is sustainable. As it is, the share of the world economy of the EU from when we joined to now has now more than halved, and I just think we're becoming more and more uncompetitive, and there's a whole world out there of more than 7 billion people that we need to be part of. So I campaigned in the end for Brexit, and I voted for Brexit. The majority of people who voted in the country voted for Brexit. The majority of people in my constituency voted for Brexit as well. I believe that it is absolutely right that we made that decision. And events over recent weeks and months, certainly during these negotiations, have reinforced in me that our future lies outside of the EU rather than in it. Just in the last few days, we've seen some really worrying speeches from people like Guy Verhofstadt complaining that more EU countries are not giving up more of their powers to the EU institution. We've heard the heads of France and Germany talking about an EU army. This is not where the UK wants to go, and that's why we decided on the 23rd of June 2016 to set a new course outside of the EU. And when my constituents voted to come out of the EU, they did so because we wanted to take back control of our borders. We wanted to come out of the single market that meant we had to allow free movement of people. We voted to come outside of the customs union because we wanted to be able to set our own tariffs rather than have to go along with those tariffs set by the EU, in many cases not in the best interests of the sort of businesses we have in the UK, and because we wanted to be able to negotiate our own trade deals. The EU only has trade deals for something like 10% of the world's economy. Well, 1 in 12 people on this planet is an Indian under the age of 28. India has overtaken us in terms of the size of its economy, and yet the EU spent 9 years failing to negotiate a trade deal with India, as it has failed with China and with the US and other major economies. We need to be engaged and working and trading and talking to those countries, and remaining part of the customs union and remaining within the EU prevents us from doing that. And then, of course, there's the whole issue of who actually is sovereign over our laws. And all the time we're part of the EU, then we can be second-guessed, and our courts and our parliament can be overruled by the European Court of Justice. So these were the main reasons that I backed Brexit, and I think the main reasons that most people who voted to leave did so. Now, of course, there's been a lot of discussion, a lot of negotiation, a lot of difficult discussion over the last couple of years. And I've given time and space to the Prime Minister to be able to stand up for Brexit and negotiate a deal which actually is in the best interests of the United Kingdom and also in the mutual interests with the EU going forward. When she says that no deal is better than a bad deal, I agree with her. It's really important that we get this deal right now. And my concern about delaying the final terms of the deal is, well, we've had over 2 years to discuss some of the more technical points. Why do we think we're going to solve those in the coming months so that we have to keep the terms of the deal open-ended? So I'm afraid this document gets a big thumbs down from me. We don't know exactly the terms about free movement of people. We still don't know what the status of UK citizens living and working in the EU countries will be, even though we've been exceedingly generous in saying we will guarantee the rights of EU citizens who are already in the country and still come to this country during the transition period. That's a big issue that needs to be dealt with. There's nothing in this agreement that has the terms of our trade deal, because that's still to be negotiated. So what sort of trading relationship are we going to have with the EU? Although the EU is a declining part of world trade, it will still be a very important trading partner with us If we sign this deal, we still don't know what that trading arrangement is going to be. But my biggest concern is this whole issue around Northern Ireland. Now, when we had the whole debate over the referendum, the Northern Ireland border and the so-called stopgap was never really mentioned. It was never a big issue, and I think it has been fabricated by the EU in order to frustrate this deal and make it as hard as possible. But because of that, and in this embryonic deal, effectively, we are going to stay within the customs union potentially indefinitely. We already knew there was going to be a transition period up to the end of 2020, and I think that is perfectly acceptable because it's a complicated business when you come out of a union that you've been in for the last 45 years. But ultimately, we voted to come out of the EU, we voted to be able to set our own laws, and we voted to be able to determine our own trade deals, the tariffs on our trade, and our employment, and many other practices like that. Under this document, we don't have that power. We still won't have that power by the end of 2020, and because it's an open-ended customs union, and it can only be up to the EU to agree when we eventually come out of that customs union, we are effectively signing on the dotted line now without knowing exactly what our status is going to be for years and potentially many more years to come. And that is not what we voted for. That is not Brexit. So I'm afraid the Prime Minister, who has shown huge resilience and energy, I have to say, in this whole process, has produced a document, a draft conditions for the deal that just do not deliver Brexit. The Brexit I voted for, or the Brexit that my constituents voted for. And that's why I cannot support this document. It's why I implore the Prime Minister to go away again, to when she goes to Europe, to speak to her European colleagues, to say that this deal does not cut the mustard. It's not what she promised this country at her Lancaster House speech and many other speeches. It's not what was promised in the Conservative Manifesto on which I stood back in 2017. So we want a real Brexit, and I'm afraid this doesn't produce it, and that's why, with great regret, I say I cannot support this deal, and it's time we all stood up for Brexit, and a proper Brexit that means this country can enjoy a properly independent role in the world in the future, with a close relationship with the EU, but not one where effectively we are still run by the EU with no say on the rules. That's why I'm standing up for Brexit.